Hey guys, welcome back. So we're going to go ahead and automate logging in to Netflix. So let's go ahead and get started. So we have let's go to Google, go to Netflix. Okay, so the first thing we want to do, let me zoom in so you guys can see. All right, let's see. We have an email or mobile number and a password input field, and we have our sign in. Okay, so let's take a look at these by inspecting. So let's inspect. Okay, so first I want to look for an ID. I don't see an ID, but I see a name. Okay, so and a class. So I wouldn't want to use the class because this looks auto-generated. So there are some other techniques we could use, like starts with maybe, but that seems kind of complicated. That might not change. A good way to tell is if we refresh the page. So what does that end in? A0, R0. So let's refresh this for a second. So they didn't change, but still don't trust it. It might change eventually. That might be the ID. That looks kind of suspicious to me, but this looks nice and smooth. So I would prefer to go with name. Okay, so let's look at the password. Okay, similar situation. I would go with name in this case. Okay, now let's look at the sign in button. Oh, okay. Okay, so we're gonna have to do an XPath for this one because I don't trust these classes. Because, what I mean by I don't trust the classes are that auto-generated characters look like they're appended at the end. So it's hard to tell if that's going to change soon. But like things, so you want things that are stable, like the button and the text. Okay, so let's go ahead and begin automating and setting up our pages. So here, let me bring over Visual Studio. Let me close my weight utilities. Okay, so let's go back into our Selenium Starter Kit and we'll go to our variable page. So if you're new, let me just zoom out. This is just a template. So we're going to take this page, copy it, and it's going to be representing this login page. So let's go ahead and copy this, we'll paste it, bring this over. Okay, so let's change this name. We'll call this Netflix login page. I'll copy that so we can change the class name. We want to change the constructor to match. So now we have about 3 elements that we're focused on, which is the email, password, and the sign-in button. So let's go ahead and build our objects for those. Zoom in a bit. You guys can see that. If you're on your phone, if you're on your computer, I want it to be visible for everybody. Okay, so we agree to do by name, so this is by XPath. So, okay, let's build this out. So first we're going to have a by object so we can do the weights, and then we're going to make a iWeb element so we can do advanced actions if we need them. So that's why I like to have both. It's just a technique. There's several ways to do this. Okay, so let's go ahead and give this a meaningful name. So we'll call this email. Just call it email. Well, okay, we'll call it email input by. Okay, so I'm appending by as just the type. Really, it's the email input field. You can name this anything, but I like to put by So not everybody agrees to put the type at the end, so just do what works best for you. Okay, so now that that's out of the way, we'll add name, and let's change this here, and we'll change this, we'll keep element just so we can tell the difference. Okay, so now we need to do the same thing for our password. So let's just copy this, and we'll call this password input by, and the web element of the password input by will use the driver.find element by the password input by. And so we'll change this to be password input element. And then finally, that's kind of messy. Finally, we will need our sign in button. So we'll call this sign in button. Do something similar here, and we'll change this to sign in button. Okay, so the button is going to have to be an XPath. Okay, so now let's clean this up just a bit. Okay. So now we need, let's bring Netflix back over. So now we need our name and our password. So we're going to be using this name for password, this attribute for password, and we're going to be using user login ID for the email or mobile number input field. So we're using its property, its attribute of name. The value of its attribute is user login ID. Okay? So we're going to put that in here. And then we're going to put password here. Okay, now for the sign in button, we're going to need a custom XPath here. So what I would do is I would look for, okay, so XPaths can be as complicated as you want them, but you want them to be as simple as possible. So what we can do here is I would personally do by tag and by text. So let's see if that will work. Okay, hold on one second. One second here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go into, let's see, post button. So I'm building an XPath for tag equals button and text equals sign in. So that should look something like this. Okay. So that should look something like this. Right here. I know I just said that twice. Okay, so we want the tag, which is button. So we're going to look for we're going to try to find this button by its HTML tag, which is button. And then we are going to look for where the text is equal to sign in. So it's going to traverse the DOM and it's going to look for any button. It's going to only look at buttons, and then it's going to say, okay, of these buttons, which one has text that equals this text? So that's how we're going to click. That's how we're going to set the selector path for this button. So now we want to put an angle bracket. We want to say text equal to sign, and I should probably copy and paste the sign in just to be sure. Here, yeah, let me do that. Let me just do that. Because sometimes, you know, let me just make sure I didn't make a mistake. Okay. Okay, so now let's go ahead and build our methods. And so we'll just call this login to, we'll just call it login. And we want to wait until our email input is visible. So we're going to do this pair pattern on all three. Excuse me. So let's see. So now we have our input. Okay, so we're not clicking. We're going to actually send keys. And again, we want to create parameters for this. So string, username. Well, technically it's email or mobile number, so email or number. And then we want string password, because we're going to send the email or phone number to the email input element. And here, let's do something very similar. And then we're going to use the password this time. So the password input by, and we're going to send that to the password input element. Password input element. I zoomed in too far. Okay, so finally, all we need now is the sign in. So we're going to wait until visible for the sign in button. So the until visible expected conditions class only takes a by, so that's why we can't wait for an element. So we'll go ahead and click this button. So we'll do sign in button element dot click, and that should be it. Okay, so now let's zoom out and take a look at our class. Okay, so this class represents these three elements that we care about. We can add more, but for now we're just going to focus on these three. Okay, so this is the whole class. Alright, so now what we'll do is we'll go and create our test. So the test pulls from the class. So let's, similarly, how do we grab the variable page and copied it? We're going to do the same thing with this example test template. So we're going to take this and we're going to copy it. Let's go into our example test. Let's give it a name. We'll call it Netflix login test. Okay, so let's rename our class. Class names have to be unique. Okay, so now, just like we're pulling in this variable page and creating an instance of the object, we need to do the same thing for the page, for the Netflix login page that we created earlier. So let's go back here and let's define our variable. So we'll call it, well, it has to be the actual class name. So Netflix login page, and we'll call it Netflix login page. You could just call it Netflix login, or even Netflix for short. So Netflix login, is equal to new Netflix login page, and then we're going to pass in a driver. Okay, so that allows us to access the methods on this page. Now, if so this is public. If this was private, if the access modifier was private, we would not be able to access this method. So I can show an example of that. So, okay, so we're going to need the sign-in URL. And guys, hey, you should check out Break Into Tech. I go into a lot more detail and examples on this stuff, so you should check it out. Alright, so let's go ahead and use our Netflix login. And then what we'll do here is Netflix login page. Now you see this dot? This is allowing us access to the available methods on the page. So you see we have our login method here, which is this login. So if we called it login, hold on, wait. If we called it login and we go back to our test and we access the methods and the properties of the class, we now have if we called it login. So we could use this. But I do want to show one thing, which I should probably make an entire separate video series on, but the access modifier. So if you accidentally name this private, when we go to Netflix login test, or Netflix login, notice how the method we're looking for is not here. So if we call it login, the method is not here. That's because the access modifier on the page is private. So that means that classes outside of this class can't reference this method directly. So if you had another method inside, then yeah, you could invoke this method down here under more methods. But as long as this is private, we can't. So now we have to have it as public. Okay, so let's go back to our Netflix login test, and we'll change the name. Actually, no, I'll leave it for now, just so we can all see. Okay, so now if we call it login, so this is the name of our method. Now this is red because it takes two arguments: the email or phone number, which is one string, and the password. So we need to define, so we'll say string, email, or phone. You can call this anything. I'm going to write it out so we can get the idea here. Email or phone number. I have the dog scratching at the door. Hold on one second, I'm going to let her in. Okay, so let me zoom in a bit. So this is tricky. For the example, we could put email or phone number, but what we'll do is we'll do both. We'll just do both. Okay. I know some of you may have done that differently, but so fake email address 12345 at don'tspamnetflix.com. Okay, so that's our email address, and our phone number will just be something very simple. And then finally, we need a password. So we'll call this password. Okay, and for the record, you don't want to put your password or your login credentials directly on your test. You want to put them in like a key vault or an environment variable, GitHub Actions. At the very least, you want to put them in like a JSON file. I mean, if you're running it locally, I understand, but if you're doing this in production, you want to reference your secrets from a different location. So this is more of a do as I say, not as I do. But this is just for practice, so it's fine. Okay, so let's give it a password. We'll just call this some strong password. Okay. So this is still red because it's going to take in 2 of these 3. So remember, the actual input field can take a mobile number or an email. So that's why we've done this here. Okay, so let's go ahead and we'll just do email first. We'll just do email and then separate it by comma and then pass in the password. Okay, so let's go ahead. So, okay. Let's add a thread.sleep just so we can see the behavior of it. But after we're done, we want to delete the thread.sleep. Okay, so let's go ahead and run this. So right click and run test. Oh, you know what? Actually, Netflix might not load incognito. Interesting. Okay, so I don't believe this is going to work because I have this window opening incognito, but okay, here. This actually might not load. Netflix seems to not be loading incognito. So, okay, our test failed, and the way we can fix that, okay, I didn't expect to go into this particular class. So, okay, real quick, we have our driver page. This is what actually stands up our driver. And you might hear my dog, she's a big girl. Okay, so this is our driver page. What we might have to do is remove this argument of incognito. So this is how you would also set the browser maximizing, if you want to set it to certain dimensions, if you want to make it open incognito. So let's go ahead and just comment that out and see if that fixes it. So the actual error should have been that it couldn't find, yeah, it wasn't able to find the username. It wasn't able to find this because the first line that it tries to run when we call this method is this email input by ID. So it's looking for this one right when it's loading. Okay. So here, let me change this back. I'm going to rename this back to login. And if I had checked those, okay, perfect. So now let's give this a more proper name. Login to okay, now let's run this again. Okay, perfect. So that was the reason. So it failed initially. So not all web pages will allow you to use incognito. So just keep that in mind. I normally use it, but now here let's do one more thing. I want to get you guys into the habit of this. So how do you prove the sign-in worked? So yeah, we clicked the button, but that doesn't necessarily mean that it worked. So what you want to do is find something. So after you sign in, after, like, let's just assume the sign in was successful here. After you sign in, you want to find a static element or something that's only there after you've signed in. So we're going to just pretend, like hypothetically, we've signed in successfully, and now one of these elements is something that proves we've signed in. So let's just use this incorrect password 4. We should be able to use that. So I should be able to make an XPath that uses the tag of span, and it looks for the text that equals this. So let's go back to our login page, and we'll make one more element. Excuse me. So we will, here, let me just duplicate this one, because we are going to need an XPath. So we'll call this incorrect. Okay, so I'm just going to name it incorrect password 4, just so we know what we're looking for. So we're going to call this incorrect password 4, and we will do the same thing with the element here. And we'll change that. Okay, so now this part here, so excuse me. So we're going to be looking for, again, the span, because before we used the button as the tag, now we're going to use the text as the tag. So we should be able to find that first part of it. Okay, so this, we're changing this to span, and then we're going to change this to sign in. Okay, so this is very important. You see that space there? This is why I like to copy it. That space is also present inside of this property value. So make sure you include it. It needs to match exactly. So if there are spaces, it's got to match. If you delete this space, it for sure won't work. And this already is a maybe. So let's take a look. Okay, so we want to do an assertion. So here, let's say public void login. I was going to say login successful, but we can say incorrect password element found. It's kind of a mouthful, but this is going to be an example. So what we're going to do, it's actually not going to be a void, because void doesn't return anything. It's going to be a Boolean. So we want this to return a true or false value. So like the difference between void, and this is a whole video in itself, but the difference between void and non-void methods, it's like asking somebody to turn on a light in a room. If you do a void method and just say, hey, turn on the light, and okay, and the person goes into the room and they just turn on the light. Return methods would be like, hey, can you go turn on the light? And then the person goes and they turn on the light, but then they turn around and tell you like, hey, the light was already on, or hey, the light was already off. Like they tell you something back. So that's what a Boolean does. So it's going to return to us a true or a false if this element is actually found. So this method will just do the action. This method will do the action and then tell us something in return. So now we want to return if the password input element, zoom in a bit, is displayed. So it should just be displayed. But before we do that, let's throw in a wait till visible password element. Oh no, not the password, excuse me. The incorrect password. Jeez, my first day. Okay, so let's use the proper type and let's put that in here. Okay, so if this element doesn't work, we'll just find another one. So now what we want to do is go back to our test, which is here, Netflix login test. And so after our sleep, we will say assert is true. No, wait, excuse me. Assert that Netflix, because we need to, so to get access to the method, we have to first call the instance, incorrect password element found. There we go. This is what we want. So this is saying, okay, we actually want this to say true, so let me just fix that. So we want this to say assert, your assertions are so important, guys. Assert that this Boolean is true. So assert that after we've done this method, that this element is found on the screen. Okay, so let's run this. And you know, I'm gonna just get rid of this thread.sleep here. Okay, so now let's run this. Excellent. So it successfully entered in the text, clicked the button, and it waited, and it found this incorrect password element is found. And it asserted that it's true. So this is a solid test to say that, hey, your login was successful. Okay? Awesome. Thanks, guys. I will see you in the next one.